what you might be interested in.
Yeah, so as I said on this channel before, I'm a bit of a geek for the history of computing and how things got developed. So one thing that fascinates me is Smalltalk and how the ideas behind Smalltalk, the ideas behind object-oriented programming, and how this got into being developed as a programming language. And I know you've been part of this. What was your role in Smalltalk?
Well, so let me tell you that. So SmallTalk was originally created at Xerox PARC, a very famous research group that many people credit for creating the concept of personal computers. And I wasn't at PARC. I was working at a company called Tektronix. Tektronix is famous for oscilloscopes, but in the really in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they were the leading company developing oscilloscopes. And if you see pictures of old computers, there's usually a big oscilloscope sitting next to it there to service it and stuff. But Tektronix actually did a lot of things. We're doing computer-related stuff. So here's how so in 1977, I think it was, personal computers were just starting to kind of become commercially available in the US. The Apple II, I think, was just released that year, and a few other machines were available. And down in Silicon Valley, there was this conference that was held for several years called the West Coast Computing Fair. And that was where kind of everybody who was involved in the emerging computer industry kind of went to show off their new products, what they were doing, and what have you. And so I think in '77, so myself and Rebecca Wirfs-Brok, happens to be my wife, we drove down from Portland. We live in Portland, Oregon. So we drove down to Silicon Valley and went to I think it was the second or third West Coast Computing Fair. And the dinner speaker at that was named Alan Kay. Now, Alan Kay is credited as the father of SmallTalk, really the father of personal computing. And in the very early '70s, he had this vision that he had a vision basically of something that looks like this, that anybody could carry around, and it would be a tool for children of all ages to be creative. And so at the dinner at this conference, he showed this film of what they'd been doing at Xerox PARC to try to define this concept of personal computing. And it was like this incredible thing. The talk was titled "Don't Settle for Less." And you have to remember, at this time, what were personal computers were things with these tiny little screens that had command line style interfaces, and were extremely primitive. And this video showed this machine just doing incredible things. Animated graphics, multiple windows, text that looks like it was published in books, just really incredible. And so, I mean, that really inspired me to say, oh yeah, okay, this is the sort of thing we need to be working on, not just making personal computers that look like you're working on a terminal, but instead, really trying to change what it means to work with it, for a computer to be personal, to be a tool for individuals as opposed to tools for big companies or what have you. And so, so that caused me at Tektronix to get involved yeah, sort of a circuitous route, but Tektronix was starting a research group, and so I joined that research group, and for a couple of years, we did some experiments, starting to explore that area of computing, what personal computing devices, and and we were doing interesting things, but didn't really do anything breakthrough at the time. Although I did, one of the things I ended up doing was writing a Pascal compiler for the Motorola 68,000, which was a brand new processor, so that we could do basically systems programming in Pascal. So it turns out that Tektronix was doing some sort of scientific oriented, sort of personal computer like things, but high end, expensive. Um, and and a guy named Jack Grimes, who was kind of the chief technologist of that part of the company, had a connection with people at Xerox PARC. And at that time, so Xerox, so this is getting towards 1979, 1980. Xerox had, so the SmallTalk people at Xerox PARC had basically spent the 70s developing this thing they called SmallTalk. And we'll talk some more about what defines SmallTalk and what it is. But if a lot of people have heard the story that it was Steve Jobs came to Xerox PARC and got a SmallTalk demo, and he was blown away and went away and started what basically became the Macintosh based on what he saw, because what he saw was something that was very much like what an early Macintosh looked like in terms of user interface and interaction and its capabilities and such. So, but the group at Xerox PARC, who'd been doing SmallTalk, up until that point, it had been very secretive, and it was, other than a few things like this dinner talk I went to, it was largely just rumors in the industry about what this incredible thing was. And so the people in the SmallTalk group basically came up with a scheme for how they would make this available to the world. And that scheme involved working with, working with companies who did computers or computing devices at the time, who they thought who could build a machine, like basically a dedicated machine that would be a SmallTalk machine. And so what they did was, they had two things they did. They decided to write a series of books that would describe what this technology was, what the SmallTalk language was, how it works, and in theory had enough information that somebody could build a SmallTalk implementation. And then they also provided basically the bits, the bits of their implementation of SmallTalk, and it was in the form of a virtual image, which we can explain some more what that was. But if you can think of a SmallTalk machine as literally being a virtual machine like you might run today on your computer, where it creates an isolated, dedicated environment that's separate from the rest of what's running on the machine, and it can do whatever it needs to do, and that you can take a memory snapshot of a virtual machine and move it from place to place. Well, that's what they had for SmallTalk, was essentially the memory image of a virtual machine that ran SmallTalk. And they said, so here's these drafts of these books. We'd like your feedback on the books. Can you review these and help us polish these books? And then we're going to give you this virtual image. Follow the instructions in the book and go build a machine that will run it. Okay, and so I happened, because of what I was doing, got pulled into that project at Tektronix at the very beginning. So I was one of the reviewers of the initial SmallTalk books, what the SmallTalk community is called the Blue Book, which is really the basic book about what SmallTalk is. And then the group I was in went off and tried to start building SmallTalk machines. So I'll pause here in case you want to ask anything or direct the conversation. But
Right. So basically, you're building a machine that was specialized in running Smalltalk. But the goal was to create something that was a personal computer or something that is programmable or a user interface. What was the end goal for this?
right, so you have to. The thing you need to understand about SmallTalk, particularly SmallTalk at that time, was that what the Xerox PARC strategy was for the 70s was, well, let's build something that has the capabilities of what we think a real personal computer might be in 1995.
Hmm.
Okay, and so they built, in terms of 1970 terms, what would essentially be supercomputers that they would put under a desk for a single person to use. But those computers were extremely fast by the standards of the time. They had what they call bitmap displays, which were basically black and white raster displays that had capabilities similar to what you might have today, but were totally unlike what everybody else had. They had their own disk packs, and they were microcoded machines that could be microcoded to support different programming languages. So they were so and what Smalltalk and other things Xerox PARC did was actually then build up from that hardware a complete environment. So they didn't really have an operating system. The operating system would be part of the language. And in the case of Smalltalk, the user interface, the windowing system, if you will. I mean, windowing was really invented in the context of Smalltalk. It's like, okay, now we have this language running here on this hardware. How do we do interesting things on the screen? And that led to the invention of windows and menus, drop-down menus, and what have you. And so Smalltalk was its own world, basically. And so the first step of getting in this world, that world is, you can think of some way as the prototypical personal computer experience, pretty much of what it came to be in the 1990s.
Hmm.
But it was, back at that time, it was this whole self-contained world that depended upon the capabilities of these custom-built supercomputers it ran on. And what they gave us was a memory image of one of those computers.
Yeah.
And so, okay, and so what to kind